welcome. We have a great topic today on how to fund your tribe's next tech project, the secret sauce for grants. I know at Tribal Hub, I'm always getting people messaging wanting to know where to find grants, how to navigate them, and from IT's role perspective, what their job is. There's a lot of ins and outs to navigating this space. And we've got Jeremy here and Bill Travitz from Arctic IT are here, and they'll be going through a great session today. This session is being recorded, just so everyone is aware. I would encourage you guys to use the chat. You can talk amongst each other. You can put questions in there for Bill and Jeremy. They have asked to hold the questions. They will address the questions at the end, but feel free, throughout the session to pop some things in there if you have any questions or comments to each other. So Bill and Jeremy, if you guys are ready, I am going to turn it right over to you guys.
We are ready.
That's good.
Ready to go?
All right. Shannon, thank you so much for jumping in and substituting for Michelle, who usually hosts these things. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for attending this session today. We're really excited about what's going to transpire here. We know that there's some folks who are grant writers on the call, and I think there's going to be something for everybody, no matter what your level of sophistication in the grant space. So your presenters today are myself. I'm Bill Travitz. I formerly the IT director for the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians and have been with Arctic IT for now about a year as director of tribal business, and have some experience with actually applying for grants during my time with the Eastern Band. And Jeremy is our subject matter expert for the day. So I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about the agenda, and then I'm going to let him introduce himself. So today's presentation, we're going to do a brief high-level Arctic partnership piece, and then we'll dive right into the grant application process and what makes the secret sauce for applying for grants. And then the next item on the agenda is going to be talking about grants that are available today that have deadlines coming up that Jeremy's going to share with us. So super excited to allow him to talk to us about that. And then we're going to do a little session on what to expect after an award. There's a lot of record keeping and things that you need to take care of when you're dealing with grant funding. And then we'll just open it up for Q&A. So in our run through, it took us about 40 minutes to get through the material. So we'll try to keep on schedule today. And I'm going to open up our quick poll, and Shannon has a poll she's going to put up. Grant challenges. What are your biggest challenges when it comes to grants? And we'll go right on into the content here as you answer those questions, and we'll be monitoring the poll results as it develops. This is the part about Arctic IT. We're not going to go into a detailed sales pitch here. Just wanted to talk about the fact that Arctic has a large presence in the tribal space. We've been at it for over 15 years. We are owned by an Alaska Native corporation, Doi Unlimited. We're a Microsoft partner, and we build solutions for tribal governments and finance, tribal enterprise, and all of those sorts of things. Here is our footprint across the lower 48 and Alaska. So you can see we've got a presence with 85 tribes scattered all across the continental United States and Alaska. And now I'm going to introduce Jeremy, who's going to give you a little bit of background on him. And then he's also going to talk about what his role is and what he does. So Jeremy?
Yeah, thanks so much, Bill. Hey everyone, I'm hoping all is well in Indian country on this amazing Tuesday. My name's Jeremy. I'm the development director for Texas Native Health. I've served in a number of capacities though in Indian country. That includes tribal council for Tunica-Biloxi. I've been the health director for Tunica-Biloxi. In my career over the last 4 or 5 years, I've raised over 65 million in federal funding and grant opportunities. I'm also a 40 under 40 award winner. I've developed a number of clinics in urban centers. And today, thanks to you guys, your hard work and you guys supporting me, some of you on this call, I've assisted over 41 tribal government clients and Native serving organizations throughout the country. Everything I do is for and by Indigenous people. And I get that from Abigail Echo Hawk, a really good friend of mine. We do everything from Indigenous grant writing to Indigenous research, Indigenous evaluation, and Indigenous nation building, as well as technical assistance for tribes out there. And think about it like this. That includes everything from maybe helping tribes with constitutional reform to developing innovative court systems to transforming enrollment systems out there today. So that's a little bit about my work, and I'll be filling you in on all of my grant-related solutions today. Thank you so much, Bill.
Absolutely, Jeremy. So Jeremy's, we're super excited to have him as part of the Arctic team. We have been working with him for some time, referring people who are looking to do technology grants. So we're going to talk about the grant application process. Well, why do you want grant money? We all have great ideas about things that programs that we want to deliver to our constituent groups, members, other constituencies. And the big question comes at the end of the day is, how do I pay for this? So we're going to talk a little bit about how this works. It all starts with an idea. So I've got a health clinic that I'm going to build, or I've got a fiber optic network that I want to build out. All sorts of great ideas are out there that are problem-seeking monies. And once you have the idea, you got to search for a solution to that idea, which is the rudiments of actually figuring out what you're going to do. And then once your solution is identified, comes the hard part, it's the price tag. So that's what we're here to talk about today. We're here to talk about the grant process, and I'll be throwing it back and forth to Jeremy, who's going to fill in a lot of the details for you and bring his experience to bear for you. So once you have a solution and an idea, this, I am told, is a Disney movie. My kids are both graduated college, so I don't get to watch Disney movies anymore. But anyway, you go on the quest looking for the money. So thanks to Cherie, our wonderful graphic artist at Arctic IT, for kicking that in there for us. All right, so let's talk about identifying suitable grant vehicles. And there's just several points here to talk through about this. Grants are most often for very specific purposes, like for the examples that are on there: public health delivery, rural broadband. There's a whole plethora of different grants, and they come largely from the federal government, but there's also granting organizations out there that are not for profits that make monies available for certain purposes. And the point to be made about this is, when you're applying for this grant, the technology may not be specifically called out. So you're going to deliver this great program to do healthcare delivery or domestic violence delivery, but you still need a record keeping system to be able to manage that and then manage how you're spending the money. So that technology, while not specifically called out, is eligible to be put into your grant writing. And Jeremy's going to really dive into that here in a minute. There are typically prohibitions. Yes, there are prohibitions on what you can use the money for. And on the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about the fact that this process is a bit of art and a bit of science. The art is being creative and coming up with a solution that you think you can write in such a way that you can apply for the grant money and the granting organization will award you that money. The science comes in keeping track of that money, the way you answer the notice of funding availability, how you write the grant. There's all sorts of particulars that go into that. And we're going to turn it over to Jeremy here in just a second. But the last piece here is, and I think I touched on this, technology is an enabler. And Jeremy, if you want to go ahead and say something about that, that's would be helpful. Thank you.
Sure. Bill's absolutely right, everyone. Technology is an enabler. So it's sort of something you can use along the way or on that journey to get you the funding, right? And the way I kind of frame this is that, well, if you've got a project, a multi-million-dollar project for a tribe. It could be maybe developing a health clinic or something like that. Well, you need something to house that data. That's technology. So it's a part of the mission to get there. It's not the end all be all or the panacea. It doesn't heal all wounds, but it's a part of that process, right? You need an EHR, you need an ERP, something for your accounting to control your books or to track those statistics. That really, really helpful data. And I'll kind of jump into that in a second, but yeah, it's absolutely an enabler. Thanks so much, Bill.
Yes. Thank you, Jeremy. All right. So Jeremy's got some websites that he's put up here that he uses in his day-to-day efforts. So I'll let him talk to you a little bit about what they are and what other avenues are there.
Yeah, for the grant writers on this call, this shouldn't be secret sauce, this part, but these are just common tools out there. If you're not using them in your tribal government, I don't know what you're doing. You strongly should be using one or the other. Grants.gov, it's a really common site. You can actually subscribe to this site and literally you'll receive updates or funding notices every single day of the week, depending on what you're subscribing to. Instrumental.com, can't stress it enough. This is a really, really fascinating website for not only tracking federal funding opportunities, but private foundation opportunities, state grants, the whole 9 yards. And the thing that I really, really love about this site is it allows you to kind of dive into some of those details of how often do they award grants every year, or what's shown on their 990s and things like that. So you can really get a better feel of, is this grantor even worth my time? Is it, no one wants to waste their time spending hours applying for a grant or an application or something like that. So Instrumental really helps you cut through the weeds with that. There's other notices as well, though. There's Grants Watch as another platform. There's also the Federal Register if you're into reading all of those pages, where you can really dive into some of the upcoming notices that are coming out. So these are just two, though, that I really, really recommend. And again, I strongly, strongly encourage every tribal organization on this webinar to dive in, check them out, and continue using them if you are.
All right, great. Thank you, Jeremy. All right, so let's talk about the process. How are you going to write for this grant? So we're going to talk a little bit about the process. Then we're also going to talk about some of the pitfalls, and we'll have some examples to share with you along the way. So we'll just dive into it. So first thing you got to do is identify the grant, which we just showed you two tools, or Jeremy rather showed you two tools that are available to identify where the grant money is. So once you have that, you can then start collecting information. And I'm going to let Jeremy talk about this one in a minute for the idea of keeping this stuff fresh, so that when you identify grants, you have most of these things already taken care of. Like, for example, last year I wrote for the statement of work for National Telecommunications Infrastructure Act funds. And there were 8 key personnel, including network engineering and project management, financial management, and you had to provide resumes for the people who were going to be your key personnel. So that's part of all that information that you need to gather and put together. And Jeremy, please, by all means, add more color to this.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll dive in right now. This is critical in terms of just time management, overall project management, the whole 9 yards. And for me, this is sort of just by trade. I'm updating this information for my clients or the urban center that I manage on a day-to-day basis, guys. This is continuous for me. And here's why. When you're submitting an application, you've already got to work on the application itself, the narrative, the budget narrative. The last thing you want to do is spend those last hours or those final moments digging for all of these documents. And here's what happens. Personnel changes, right? Changes on an ongoing basis. Status may change. Some of these documents are going to change from time to time. So really good practice for me is just keeping up to date with this as often as possible. It doesn't have to be every day or every week, but normally when you're submitting a grant, this should really take you a couple of seconds to kind of pull these attachments from whatever folder or drive or secure folder they're being stored in and for submission. It really saves you a lot of time. I've worked with clients across the country, a couple of tribes, and gone into their systems and their processes and kind of realize, wow, some of this information is missing, and you've got to, spend a couple of days sometimes piecing it together or pulling it together. Here's another point I want to make, though, while we're on this topic, Bill. Making sure the information is accurate is just as important. I'll talk about that in a second as well and give you a couple of examples. But one example that I can give you, I've worked with a client and was responsible for pulling together some of their information, reviewed their last grant, which they didn't get. And I have a strong feeling the reason they didn't get that grant was because the name of the applicant, instead of listing the tribe, it was listed as the chairman for the tribe in that case. And that wasn't really accurate. So something tells me that the review panel, I've sat on a couple of those for agencies, something tells me that that was the reason they didn't get that application. So I'll give you a couple more examples, though, as we move along. Thanks so much, Bill.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you, Jeremy. So another big component of this is preparing your scope of work. So you've got the idea. The scope of work says, how am I going to execute the idea? What do I need? What parts? What software do I need? What am I going to, how am I going to manage the project? This is a very important part of it. This is where your creativity can come in, to be able to write in such a way that it's going to be attractive, it's going to meet the requirements, and they're going to say, oh, this group of folks knows what they're going to do, and we have reasonable assurance that they're going to spend our money and actually get something done with it. So that's all in scope of work. And then the last component is the big one, and Jeremy will talk quite a bit about this in the next few slides, the reporting. So that once you've gotten an award, they're going to want to know what you're doing with their money periodically, and you can get yourself into real trouble in this area to the point of maybe possibly losing the grant funding or never getting it again. So Jeremy, please, by all means, jump in here.
This one, I'm going to expound on this in a second, but this one drives me crazy when I'm working with tribes and they're not doing the reporting. You can lose your funding. Yeah, but we'll jump into that in a second, Bill.
Yeah. All right, and I think we already covered this tip, so I'm going to go move on to the next slide. Strategies. And Jeremy, please jump in here and talk about these areas for building your grant application for funding.
Mm-hmm. Well, first, these are all great strategies of how you get there. I think when we think about being overly creative, I'll talk about the second one for just a brief moment. We as Indigenous communities, tribes, we want to be creative, right? But we want to make sure that we're actually still, meeting the requirements or the criteria that's sort of laid out in that notice of funding opportunity or funding application at FA. Here's another piece, though, that sometimes I see, at least I've observed in my experience sitting on panel reviews for different agencies, IHS, SAMHSA, et cetera. Responding to every piece of information, that's just as critical. I cannot stress this enough. This is so critical. And a good practice, one good practice or key point that I would point out is the easiest way to make sure that you're responding to each question or requirement in that NOFO is going to be just simply copying and pasting a Word document version of the NOFO into your project narrative. It really helps you do a lot of justice. And I know any of these grant writers on the call know exactly what I'm talking about. Formatting, can't stress this enough. Formatting is just as important. Is this a single space narrative? Is this a double space narrative? Are you, bound or restricted by the size of the font? Those are all things that if you're not careful, they can get you in trouble, or it can disqualify you from actually getting that application. Are you required to do, for example, a project abstract in the application? All of those things are just as important, but make sure you're actually responding to that. I'll turn it back over to you, Bill.
All right, so I wanted to launch into this next tip here. So one of the things that I found out for looking for telecom infrastructure money was frequently you would apply and the funding pool would be, 20, the available funds and the amounts of the awards would be 10% of what applications were actually submitted. So it's key to understand that these things can be incredibly competitive. And Jeremy, by all means, jump in here and talk a little bit more That.
Yeah, extremely competitive, especially post-COVID right now. And it's sort of a two-sided sword. On one hand, there's more applications leading to more competition. On the other hand, though, the agencies that are out there, these awarding agencies, are more than willing. And in fact, they're advocating to give these funds to tribes. So this is really good for us. We've just got to get out there and be a little competitive about what we're going after moving forward.
That's great advice. All right, so now we're going to talk about some of the pitfalls. And
this is my favorite part, Bill.
Yes.
One of my favorite parts about this presentation.
By all means, go on and tell us all about it.
Okay, guys, reporting failure. I'm not going to drill down too deeply into this, but this is one pitfall I've seen out there with grant funding, and it's common with us tribes. We've got to make sure that we're doing our reporting. It's one thing to get the funding. That's the easy part. The hard part is the project management, the post-award management, making sure that we're actually, complying with that. And an easy way, I don't have to stress this to my grant writers on the call, an easy way to see what reporting requirements you're bound by is to simply look at that notice of funding award. And look at that last page. That's going to tell you, are you required to submit, for example, 424s or 425s, or maybe quarterly reports, performance measure reports, et cetera, et cetera. By the way, if we don't do this, what happens, guys? We lose that funding. We're going to lose it at some point. That usually starts, some of these agencies have the ability to trigger that after 180 days. And remember, they remember us. They're not going to forget that we lapsed in funding or that we had to send back funding. It's not only embarrassing, but it's reputational damage. It takes years to recover from this. I've worked with a tribe in the past that has had to send over $100,000 in grant funding back, and it took years to receive funding from that agency again. I believe it took 3 years to get that funding again. But another example, or another thing I want to kind of pinpoint here, is making sure that you have some sort of strategic orientation or strategic alignment that's sort of aligning with what you're applying for. In some tribes that I've worked with, I won't say any names, but I've worked with a number of tribes where the only instructions that you're seeing is to the grant writer, at least, or to the consultant, is go out there and just find us the money. Just find us whatever you can get. And that's a great, that's hopeful thinking, but that just doesn't cut it today. You want to make sure that whatever you're going after has some merit to it, like Bill has kind of expressed, or that there's sort of a needs-based criteria of what you're going after. Meaning, if behavioral health happens to be the big epidemic on your reservation, then chances are you need to be applying for behavioral health, not education or some other area. Third topic I want to talk about, it's journal dependency. This is becoming more and more concerning as I'm working with tribes out there in America right now, or in Indian country. Do you have the capacity or the ability to manage these grants? Often we see that, tribes are consulting or they're hiring external factors, but developing that capacity to manage this post-award process is so important. It's great to have consultants. It's great to have external accountants and stuff like that, but making sure that you're building up your tribal government's, ability to manage this and just be in a line of communication is so really important to the life of this grant being successful. The other thing is the lack of process. I've kind of talked about this a little bit. I'll talk a little bit more about it and maybe drive you crazy on this call, but having policies and processes together are so important. Meaning, is there a time management schedule or a project management schedule when, the grant writer gets together with accounting or your grants manager or whatever staff is sort of responsible or tasked with managing this grant? Is there sort of an overwhelming or an overlying process of how that's going to take place? Is data collection, evaluation, is that also being considered? Is that happening on maybe a continuous process? Is that quarterly or is it ongoing? There needs to be some rhyme or reason behind that, because the data is ultimately going to be able to tell the agencies the guys that are evaluating these grants or reviewing these performance monitoring reports, are you being successful? Are you, achieving the goals, the objectives that you sort of set out to do? It ultimately tells them if you're being a good steward with those funds and enables you to continue receiving that funding. So those are a couple of examples. I'll talk about a few as we go along though.
All right, so alternative funding strategies for technologies. And I'm going to, again, defer directly over to Jeremy on indirect costs and some of these other areas because he has the direct experience with these things and has some pretty good advice about what tribes are actually entitled to. So Jeremy, take it away.
Thanks so much, Bill. Guys, this gets better and better. This is a little secret sauce. Before we even dive into grants, I always like to give a little yield sign and encourage tribal governments, grant writers on the call that are not familiar with this, to check these things out as well. These potential strategies. Maybe you've got, strategies right in front of you and you don't even realize it. And these are not just strategies, by the way, in Indian country. If you're compacting and contracting under PL 638, these are also rights, guys. So you're entitled to indirect cost. You can negotiate those indirect costs in such a way that where you can utilize this to fund technology, supplies, infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe that could be utilized for the implementation or the maintenance of that technology. The second one, point number 2, I won't spend a lot of time on these, but I just want to make you aware, program redesigns. You have areas of your federal budget, maybe your federal budget or your grant budget, and you can reallocate some of those funds to maybe fund a specific purpose on the direct end. That's also possible with PL 638 tribes. Not only that, but Title V tribes, I want to speak to that as well. Those of you that are maybe from self-governance tribes, you're operating under Title V. You guys can do this at any point. And you don't need federal approval. You can redesign your budgets at the click of a switch. All you need is council approval and a resolution. Here's another one. I work with a number of tribes. We've been successful in doing this. Revenues from Section 105L leasing. Maybe if you're not doing this, consider doing it. I love sharing these examples of tribes where they're leasing essentially space back to the Bureau of Indian Affairs or IHS, and you're using those revenues to support technology. That's right, you can do that. You can absolutely do that. The third is pretty straightforward, third-party revenue. Maybe you've got a health center or a behavioral health facility out there and you're generating revenues from that. You could absolutely use that to support your technology needs today. And if we turn over to the next slide, Bill, I want to talk about indirect costs before we jump into the good stuff. For those of you that maybe you're not familiar with this, what you're looking at is just a really simple slide. And on the left-hand side, you've got the tribes that are, contracting, compacting grants under 638 funding, and then you've got everyone else in America. So here's an example: if you're receiving 600,000 of PL 638 funds, and your indirect cost rate, that rate that you've negotiated with maybe the Interior's IBC or HHS or some other agency that negotiates those rates, if your rate is 30%, you're not only going to receive that 600,000 in grant funding, you're going to receive a lump sum on top of that under 638. That's equivalent to about $180,000. You can utilize that to not only pay your grant writers, your HR, your accounting, but the cost of implementing and maintaining that technology. Because what is that funding? Where's that funding going to go to, everyone? It's going to go to your IDC pool, which broadens that scope of funding out and allows you to use it for your tech purposes. Whereas on the right side, as you can see, all of those non-PL 638 awards, you're pretty much just using the lump sum, and that IDC is actually built into the award itself, or it's going to be built in. It's an elective cost. If you want to use it, you can. If not, you don't have to. Turning it back over to you, Bill.
Great stuff, Jeremy. That's an impressive slide. Being able to,
everyone.
Yeah, being able to use what you're entitled to help, fund your process. That's great stuff. All right. So now for some of the fun stuff, grants that are available today. So I'm going to hop right on to the next slide, and Jeremy's going to talk to you about 3 slides worth of grants that are currently up for applications.
Yep. And thank you, Bill. By the way, guys, there are thousands of opportunities out there. Last time I checked, there are about 1,200 a year that tribal organizations, tribal nations, or they qualify for. That includes your CITS 38 funding and other set-asides for tribes. These are just a few that we pulled just to give you a couple of examples of how creative you can get out there. The first is your pediatric mental healthcare access program. That's the deadline's coming up really soon, but this is a really easy opportunity to write towards. They're awarding up to $700,000 to basically address pediatric care, mental health in Indian country and other parts of the country. Really, really easy opportunity to apply for. And here's what you could do. You could use some of that funding towards supplying or towards funding technology. And how could you do that? Through your IDC, of course, or on the direct side, your equipment, through your supplies line items, because it turns out to run a program like this, you need that data collection. You need those evaluation tools. Tools like Arctic IT that can track member data, that can track income and demographics of a tribe, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you're going to see me using that trend throughout the next couple of ones. The next two are somewhat similar, but different. One deals with ICWA, state partnerships to implement best practices in Indian child welfare. The third one is your tribal court improvement program. This is one of my favorite programs to work with, and here's why. This program not only focuses, and I believe we have a couple of participants on this call that this may pertain to, but this not only pertains to improving tribal court systems, this pertains to improving the technology that runs those systems. That's right, you can use this. You can use this fund or this opportunity to fund your technology. That could be Arctic IT, for example. Maybe you want to run technology that deals with your court system, the tracking of those cases, maybe the tracking of litigation and so forth, how those processes flow, the filing, the e-filing that takes place in your court systems. They're offering up to $150,000 for that last opportunity. Looks like the due date for that is June 15th. Really want to encourage each of you that have tribal court needs to apply for that, and we're happy to assist you with that process. I want to turn over to the next slide, Bill, if possible, and I want to talk about a few more. One of them is my absolute favorite right now that I'm really excited for. Wait, we've got one more I want to talk about. This is another one that is specifically built for tribes. This is support for 9 and 8 tribal response cooperative agreements. These are cooperative agreements. I believe they're giving somewhere from 17 to 20 awards out for this. This is built specifically and designed specifically for tribal nations. They're giving up to $2 million for tribes, guys. The due date for this is July 18th. And this deals with establishing crisis centers and 9 and 8 tribal lifelines. There are not enough, as you guys know, out there in Indian country. Indian country suicide rates are higher than ever. We need to address that. Here's one way you could, if we're thinking creatively, you could build that crisis center, integrate it with Arctic IT and other EHRs and tribal platform technology solutions, and you could build those costs on these through these NOFOs. You could supply or support those costs on those grant applications itself. So as you're writing that narrative, you could implement or you could build in these costs through your grant narratives and your budget narratives and so forth. But the third one, my absolute favorite right now, I hope that each of you apply for this, that are in the process of learning language, revitalizing language, or bringing languages back home. This is the Living Languages grant from the BIA. They're offering up to $300,000. The due date for this is in August. This is $300,000, by the way, in August annually that they're going to give you. Here's a creative way you could apply for this. Use this to fund your technology platform, and you design that technology platform, which Arctic IT has the ability to do, to integrate it with your tribal language. Maybe that includes a member portal. Maybe that includes your social services department, if it's being housed on a platform like Arctic IT. Maybe that includes your health systems or other areas, your membership portal specifically, where at literally the click of a button, everything on that portal integrates from English to Choctaw, to Navajo, to another language, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because otherwise, this is, and the best way to put this would be, this is how you immerse language. This is the best practice of how you can immerse language and really innovate your membership into learning their language. Therefore, it becomes a living language. My absolute favorite, if you're not applying for this and you have a language program, I don't know what you're doing today because this is going to be an absolute joy for tribes that are implementing. In fact, the last two that we just covered, this one and tribal support for 998, I'm applying for it. I'm that competitive. I want to see each of you applying for it. If you need assistance with that, get in touch with us. We can help you with that. Native public health resilience. This is floated around through the Indian Health Service for quite some time. Looks like the NOFO for that is scheduled to come out in either February or March of next year. That's $400,000 to helping tribal economies become resilient from the public to prevent things like COVID and other epidemics from happening again. Well, you need technology to support that. You need technology absolutely for data collection, to respond to these epidemics. You need it for evaluation, and you need it to implement and run these, to manage these grants, the whole 9 yards. So those are 3 other examples, but I want to give you guys, before I kind of shut up, I want to give you guys 3 more examples that sometimes we don't consider an Indian country. These are foundations, everyone. I've worked with a number of tribes and I've went in and asked, how many federal grants do you have? They can give me an endless supply. How many federal or how many private foundations, I'll ask after, do you work with? Sometimes I don't hear very few. These are 3 right here that you can work with. They're pretty broad. Their application dates are always coming about, and they're really easy to qualify for. In fact, I've worked with a few of them. They're encouraging tribes to actually apply. The first is your Open Windows Grant. That's through the agency fund. It's been an absolute pleasure of mine to work with them. They're always looking for Indian country applicants, and you can utilize this for direct technology needs. That's right, to support direct technology needs. Doesn't have to be tied to a program or some other need. You just have to apply and advocate that you've got a need that's technology based. The second one, if you don't know about this one and you're not applying, I don't know what rock you're living under right now. It's the Yield Giving Open Call Opportunity. This is from Mackenzie Scott, by the way, who is the ex-spouse of Jeff Bezos. She's giving away $1 million to over 250 organizations throughout the country. These are all BIPOC opportunities. Again, $1 million. It's best idea takes all for these opportunities. If you're not applying, I don't know what you're doing. The opportunity for this is a 5-page application, by the way. Really easy opportunity to go after tribes. I strongly encourage you to apply for this one. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity. The third one is more youth focused. It's from the Hope Lab Foundation, and they're offering anywhere from $25,000 to $200,000 in award funding. The due date for this is next April. Another opportunity for tribes that are serving youth, which we all are, that are serving youth from a technology perspective. That could be to support your language program. Maybe your health department supports pediatrics or other youth. You could utilize this to support those costs. Your tribal court system, your social services department, or a member portal, the whole 9 yards. But again, I really, really want to encourage tribes to not just look at it from state and federal grants. Let's also look at these private foundations and get our fair share due from them as well. That's all for me, Bill, on this though.
Great. Thank you, Jeremy. So yeah, I did want to point out before we jump onto this slide that what we've seen at Arctic IT, some of your grants specifically for courts, we've seen a real uptick in people modernizing court systems. And the other big thing that we've seen this particular year is customer engagement or citizen engagement portals. Those are really popular and they're great uses of technology funds, and they're very easy to justify what the benefits are. So really great stuff. So after the award, we have a slide here that's got some steps on it. First step is preparing, and then anticipate the funds of the project and understand what reporting is required. Next is making sure that you have a schedule that works and that you're able to meet your deadlines in terms of reporting. You're also able to meet your deadlines for the actual execution of your project. And then tracking. And Jeremy touched on that at length earlier. Jeremy, do you have anything you want to add to this narrative here?
No, just tracking is so important, guys. We get this funding, and it's our job to be good stewards. And the way I've always framed this, and I've got these stories from other leaders in the Indian country, is, we received this funding. It used to be their fault, but now we're getting that funding, and it's on us. And we want to, as indigenous nations, tribal nations, we want to show the state and the feds that we are the best conduit for all of this funding, meaning we can develop better programs than them, better services than them. And that's the way I've always sort of just framed this. But again, being familiar, another thing that I'm seeing up here as a pro tip is being familiar with the extensions. So critical. Can't stress this enough. Being familiar with your agency, working with them, don't just receive the funding and disappear. Having that critical key relationship with your project officer or your grants officer and all of the staff on the federal end or from the end of the grantee if we're working with a private foundation is so critical, because they can really come in the clutch and really assist you with getting through this process. But for letters of extension of what that process is going to look like, if you need extension. The other point I want to kind of emphasize here is, guys, no one's going to get it right. It's okay to be, it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay. Agencies are no longer looking at tribes to be perfect with their reporting measures and things like that. They know that this is a process. They know that the first 11 to 13 months is sort of an implementation phase. So be mindful of that when you're doing reporting, when you're scheduling reports and you're tracking your data, you're tracking your evaluation and your processes moving forward. Those are so critical. Can't tell you how many tribes or organizations I've worked with today that maybe they started out in, not the greatest place, but as things have moved along, they see the agencies can see those improvements. And that's normally what they look for. It's not to see 100% of metrics hit every single time. That's all for me, Bill. Thank you for that. A great point.
Great info. Thanks, Jeremy. All right, we're wrapping up here, folks. We've gotten to the end. So we just a reminder here about grants.gov and instrumental. And just to say that we are here as a resource for you, both me with Arctic IT and Jeremy. So as you move into these processes or want to improve them, there's people out there that can help you. And partnering with a grant writer is a great thing to do. Jeremy mentioned earlier, having a consultant to sort of set up your internal tracking process. That is a resource that's out there and available to you. And we are 46 minutes into it. And the next slide is questions. So Shannon, have we
favorite part.
have we any Q&A? And we could probably check in on the poll.
Yeah. So we do have a question from Jay. It looks like he's asked, for some grants, I feel like technical staffing, legal items, and identifying net funding overlap is not stated in some NOFOs. The question would be, if the announcement does not include aggregate funding pools and federal funding overlap and it becomes an issue, how do tribes recover the shortcomings of qualified advisory unless they've had the experience previously? I suppose it's change management. So that is in the Q&A if you'd like to reference that, but we do have one question there.
It's a great question. Was it Jay? That's a great question, Jay. And this is where really fine-tuning and reviewing those requirements have come into play, especially for those tribal set-asides. From the federal side, they're aware that tribes are usually developing infrastructure. They're developing things like technology, and they're clearly aware that technology is an ever-changing space that is no longer elective. It's sort of a requirement for getting forward now. Reviewing those requirements, though, are always the best place to start. when I haven't seen technology as a restricted item, I'm definitely applying to support this every single time. Essentially, as long as it's not a prohibited or a restricted activity, the sky's the limit. And that's generally the opinion that I've gotten as well. I've never applied for a grant where I haven't seen it in or not listed as a restricted requirement. And I've applied for that grant. We've been awarded. I've never applied for one, and we haven't gotten it because of that. Generally, if we're including technology for, say, implementation or the hiring of advisory staff or consultants and so forth, we're usually getting those awards, and it's an allowable activity on that grant. I hope that makes sense for you.
Thank you, Jeremy. And Jay, if you have further question on that, feel free to pop it back up, or if anyone else has follow-up question on that, feel free to pop that back up in the Q&A or the chat. I did put up the poll question. So Bill, I do have 2 more questions I can put out there for you, but do you guys want to refer to the poll first?
That would be awesome.
I'm
Thank
so
you.
curious to see this poll.
It looks like first and second we're pretty close. So what are your biggest challenges when it comes to grants? 46%, we don't know where to start. 38%, we don't have a grant writer, and 17%, we don't have the bandwidth to designate this task. So Jeremy, Bill, anything that you want to put out there for the 46% that don't know where to start, or the 38% that don't have a grant writer?
Well, first, I'm putting up our contact information, and Jeremy, we have the capability to be able to point you in the right direction. And Jeremy is, of course, a great resource of this because of his experience, his long experience in this. So, Jeremy, by all means, go ahead and add anything else you want to add there that answers that question. There it is.
Oh, this is really exciting. This poll, 46%. Okay. Tribal nations, we are more than willing to assist you with these kind of things. And by the way, one of the things that we've done, or that I've done in my personal capacity, is when bandwidth is not when it's not there, that's when you really become strategic and creative. Sometimes that means partnering up with other tribes that do have that bandwidth. Happy to connect you there, but you got a grant writer on this call. Happy to help you with any of your needs. And that's what we do here at Arctic IT and beyond. Excuse me, it's been one of those days for me. We're not in this business to make money and things like that. For me, my driving force is helping tribes build that capacity to do this on their own. And there's some really creative ways to do that. Maybe that's through indirect cost. Maybe that's through pre-award costs that are sometimes you're eligible for on the SITS 38 side. There's a million ways to skin that cat, though. And if you need assistance with that, please don't hesitate to get in contact with me or Bill, and we will definitely point you in the right direction. If it's something that maybe is not in my wheelhouse or Bill's, I'm pretty sure we can help you with that and give you a solution.
I would like to add there as well, Jeremy, that there are tribes out there that are very sophisticated at this. So lean on fellow tribes that you may have contacts with. The tribe that I was with, the Eastern Band of Cherokee, has a group of people that's all they do. And they've been very successful at funding a lot of their public health initiatives and so on. So reach out to your tribal neighbors, and you may find that they have the resources that can at least get you going the right way.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Networking is key, right? With all of these things, Bill. So one of the things that we see here, 38% saying we don't have a grant writer. And we do have a question actually on, should you hire a grant writer, or are there some links and resources out there that would help in writing a proper grant proposal? Or is the answer, get a team?
Depends on the capacity. My response would be, it depends on the tribe itself. It varies. I've come across one tribe where they were really small population based, really small tribal government, but they had a very expensive grant writing team. And coming into that, kind of realizing what was going on, we were able to slim that down to really build up a team, 2 people, to meet their needs. But if you're larger tribe, you may need that capacity. It really just depends. There's a lot of other things to consider. Your finance department or your accounting department of are they handling 424s and 425s, or is that the responsibility of that grant writing team or that grants management team, or is that a project director capacity? It depends. There's no wrong or right answer on that, though. It really just depends on the tribal nation and the size of that tribal nation. But I've come across tribes that are very big, very, very big tribes, thousands of members, and maybe they got one grant writer, and that maybe that grant writer is seasonal, or they're on a fixed cost or something like that to save the tribe funding. Again, here's one more thing that comes to mind too. Having that strategic plan is so important. It can not only save you guys a lot of contracting dollars, but it can really, really build the efficiency, because when you've got that strategic plan mapped out by either your tribal administrator, your tribal council, or business committee, the grant writer or whoever you're hiring, that grants consultant, can come in and look at that and say, okay, I know the needs of this tribe. I know exactly what to look for. I can come back with either a funding matrix or sort of a funding strategy for that tribe to present to the council. That's the way that I normally go in to these tribal governments, and I do that. I don't just apply for whatever's out there. I come back with a list or a matrix of potential opportunities that align with the tribe itself. It really, really helps the tribe, or if they've got a grant writer on staff, it can help that grant writer and assist them with that, with that task and that project. This is a great question, by the way.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that, you covered, and obviously there's only so much time in the session, but, you covered what to expect after you are awarded. But another part of the strategy and thought process is, what do you do when you don't get the grant? There's a lot of time that goes in and resources that goes into it. And you don't always know maybe why you weren't awarded it. And so maybe some best practices of really taking a step back and trying to understand, what could we have done better? How can we improve this next time? And really that afterthought should be part of your strategy as well to improve.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Michelle, can I give everyone one last tip? I know we're running out of time.
Yep.
Let's say in this, here's a tip, guys. I love giving out these too. And if you want to learn more, just get in contact with me. But let's say you don't get the grant. Let's say you get the notice and it's rejected, or it says approved, but not approved, but no funding, right? Or something like that. Here's what I would do. I would encourage your grant writing team, grant writers, you probably are familiar with this, reach out to that Freedom of Information office from that grant, from that agency. So if it's Department of Justice or Department of Education or the Energy Office and so forth, reach out to their Freedom of Information officer or office. They are required to give you, upon request, they're required to give you every single application, every narrative that they did approve. Take it from there. You can see what actually worked.
That's a great piece of advice, Jeremy. I think a good tip. And I know we're running up on time, but I guess I'll just add one more thing on here. Jay added another point on of, the overlap and the build out of the infrastructure and sometimes things not being budgeted for and having that be a catch-22 afterwards. We get a lot of questions here, and this is probably for another webinar, honestly, but on sustainability, so the funding that comes or the grants awarded, and specifically for technology projects, because it's not a one and done situation, then, that build out happens. And then how do you sustain that system or the infrastructure that you've put in there? Any advice, in the last 2 minutes of sustainability?
Absolutely. Great question, Jay. Thank you for this. One suggestion I would make is have two things, a strategic plan and a sustainability plan that's underlining that. Meaning, for example, if I'm working with a tribal client today, we may get this grant in year one. We're already working on sustainability options by year 3. If this is a 5-year project, we are always looking at that. And again, I listed some of the possible options, IDC for sustainability, for the maintenance of this technology, whatever it may be. I've listed Section 105, but ultimately having a long-term strategic plan and a sustainability plan in place, challenge your grant writers, even if it's not me, challenge that grants consultant to really drive that home. start asking them those options in year 2, 3, 4, and 5, depending on the length of that grant project. Because you're right, you want to make sure that you can not only implement that and take off in year 1, you want to have something that's long-term sustainable. Great question.
Wonderful. All right. Well, we are up on time. I always like to try to be conscious of everyone's time. I know everybody has a busy day always. So Bill, Jeremy, this has been very informative. Contact information obviously was up there, so hopefully you jotted that down. If not, you can email anyone at Tribal Hub. Just contact us at tribalhub.com and we'll make sure you get connected to the right person. The session has been recorded, obviously. So if it's something that you want to share with any of your team or your peers, definitely reach out and let us know, and we'll make sure that that's up on the website as well. So Bill, Jeremy, any last things to add before we let everyone go?
No, just thank you very much for your attention and time. It was really fun to do this webinar, so appreciate y'all being here.
Thanks, everyone.
Same here. Thank you, everyone.
Take care.
Have a great afternoon.